Hello, everyone. Tonight's story begins in a room that has already chosen a winner. Celia Mercer stood beneath white orchids while the lawyer opened the will. Her husband's portrait smiled from an easel. Lily scent. Bourbon. Perfect posture. Then Cynthia Mercer rose in the front row and cut straight through the silence. "You were his wife in photographs," she said coolly. "Do not pretend you were his family in death." No one defended Celia. Not Graham Mercer. Not Ava Bell, the caretaker near the side door. Not the priest. Silence was another Mercer asset. Celia looked down at the cream envelope on the podium. Heavy stock. Gold edge. The official will. Then she lifted her chin. "Then let's hear what he signed," she said softly. In front of everyone. An hour before the reading, Celia moved through Briar Oaks like a woman walking through a staged museum of her own marriage. Oil portraits. Silver bowls. Valets who knew every family branch. She had not been born into this world. Before Owen Mercer married her, Celia worked in museum development and understood that old money liked beauty best when it came with gratitude. Owen liked to say he had married for love. His mother preferred another phrase. Good optics. She had heard that once through a dressing room door at a gala. Smart enough to speak well. Pretty enough to soften him. Harmless enough not to interfere. She never confronted him. She watched instead. Quiet women often learned more than loud ones. During the last 6 months of Owen's life, the club crowd watched his decline in whispers. He had fallen from a staircase in the Mercer townhouse. Then came headaches, confusion, temper, and fear. Ava Bell arrived after that. Recommended by a concierge physician. Efficient. Gentle in public. Possessive in corridors. By spring, Ava controlled medications, appointments, and access. Even Celia was told when she could enter her own husband's room. That afternoon, while guests signed the condolence book, Graham cornered Celia near the coat check. "Do not make this uglier than it has to be," he said quietly. "The family has arrangements." Arrangements. Such a careful word. It smelled like lawyers and locked drawers. Celia only adjusted her black gloves. "So does grief," she answered calmly. He mistook that calm for surrender. Most of them did. The lawyer, Edwin Pike, did not want to read. Still, he opened the envelope. Owen Mercer left the Highland Park townhouse to the Mercer Family Trust. He left controlling shares to his mother until they passed to Graham. He left a one-time settlement to his wife, Celia Mercer, sufficient for relocation and discretion. Discretion. The word floated through Lily's and Crystal like perfume over rot. Edwin continued. Celia was to vacate the townhouse within 10 days. Personal effects subject to family review. Any public challenge would trigger immediate suspension of funds pending probate examination. There it was. Not grief. Strategy. Graham almost smiled. Ava Bell kept her gaze on the floor, but one heel began to tap. Celia heard it. That tiny sound cut sharper than the legal language. A caretaker who should have been invisible was nervous. Edwin reached the final signature line. Executed 6 days before death. Witnessed and notarized. 6 days before death, Owen had barely held a pen without trembling. 2 nights before that, he had whispered to Celia that somebody kept changing his pills. She had told no one. Not yet. Now the room waited for tears, outrage, collapse, any useful performance. Celia only asked one question. Who witnessed it? The room tightened around that sentence. Because now they were no longer burying Owen. They were protecting the version of him that kept everyone paid. Edwin named the witnesses. Ava Bell. Cynthia Mercer. The notary was a family retainer from the trust office. There was an audible shift in the room. Not shock. Recognition. This had been arranged inside the same circle now pretending to grieve. Celia stepped away from the podium to breathe. One step only. Cynthia took it as weakness and moved in. She did not raise her voice. Women like Cynthia rarely needed to. Take the settlement, Celia. Leave with dignity, she said, sweet with venom. We gave you a name, a house, a season table, and every invitation that mattered. Owen grew tired. Men do. Do not embarrass yourself trying to become tragic. The cruelty was surgical. Not loud enough to be indecent. Loud enough to travel. A younger guest near the back actually looked relieved. At last, the widow had been classified. Opportunist. Decorative wife. Paid inconvenience. Then Graham added his own blade. If you contest this, every expense you've enjoyed will be audited, he said. The condo in Aspen. The membership sponsorship. The museum board introductions. Be careful how much of our generosity you force into daylight. Our generosity. That nearly broke her. Not because it was true, but because Owen had used the same language in private after too much scotch. As if affection had been an allowance. As if marriage itself had been a grant with revocable terms. For the first time, Celia's breath caught. The room saw it. They leaned toward it like guests toward a toast. Ava finally spoke from the wall. He wanted peace at the end, she said coolly. She made him agitated. That line struck deepest. It recast Celia not only as unwanted, but harmful. She closed her eyes for one brief second. When she opened them, the tears they expected were there. But they were not surrender. They were timing. Celia reached into her handbag with no hurry at all. What came out was not a tissue. It was a silver voice recorder, small enough to fit in a palm, old enough to be overlooked by people who trusted newer lies. She placed it on the side table beside the condolence book. The click against wood sounded louder than it should have. Ava went white first. Then Graham. Celia spoke to the lawyer without looking at him. Please tell the room whether Texas requires capacity for execution. Fully informed capacity. Yes, Edwin said uneasily. She pressed play. Static. Bed linen. A labored breath. Then Owen's voice, frayed and frightened. He said Ava was switching his evening capsules. He said his mother kept bringing papers when he was confused. He said, very slowly, that the will he signed in April was not the one they had shown him in May. Then a second voice entered the recording. Male. Young. Panicked. Mateo Ruiz. The night nurse. He told Owen he had hidden the April envelope where Ava never dusted. Inside the leather atlas box in the library bar. He said he was sorry. He said he was afraid of losing his visa sponsorship through the private care agency. He said if anything happened, Celia should hear this. The recorder clicked off. Nobody moved. Then, from the back of the room, a shaky voice broke. I am here. Mateo stepped forward from the service entrance in a plain dark suit. In his hand was a sealed cream envelope. Older. Creased. Not the same one on the podium. A brother's secret, protected by a stranger and buried in a bar box. The room had wanted tears. It got chain of custody. And just like that, grief was no longer the main event. Evidence was. Edwin Pike accepted Mateo's envelope with both hands, as if it might explode. In a way, it did. The April will was witnessed by Mateo and Owen's longtime accountant. Properly notarized off-site. It named Celia as executor. It granted her the townhouse for life, a charitable fund in her choosing, and 35% of Owen's personal estate. But that was not what emptied the room of air. The final codicil addressed Owen's brother. If Graham Mercer had continued concealing transfers from Owen's private investment account, those findings were to be delivered to federal investigators and to the board of Mercer Development. A brother's secret. There it was in black ink. Not inheritance greed alone, but a family fracture already bleeding behind the wallpaper. Graham moved first. Not at Celia. At the paper. That is not valid, he snapped. He was paranoid. He accused everyone. Edwin stepped away from him. Cynthia's face lost all art. Ava backed toward the wall like a woman searching for an exit she had once controlled. Celia did not raise her voice. The room came to her anyway. Read the attached letter, she said quietly. All of it. Edwin obeyed. Owen's letter was brief. He wrote that he had married Celia because she made rooms feel less false. He wrote that he had failed her by letting his family turn affection into currency. He wrote that if this letter was being heard aloud, then someone had tried to replace his wishes after he became easy to manage. Cynthia made a small sound then. Not grief. Exposure. And for the first time that evening, guests stopped looking at Celia as prey. They began looking at the Mercers as a collapsing dynasty. Once the second will was read aloud, the room behaved exactly as powerful rooms always do when safety changes sides. People stepped back. Not from grief. From risk. Two members of the Mercer Development Board quietly left the third row and began making calls in the hallway. The priest pretended sudden interest in his program. One of Cynthia's closest friends, who had praised family honor over lunch for 20 years, turned her face away when Cynthia reached for her hand. Public embarrassment was finally doing what private pleading never had. Celia took the microphone from the podium. She did not shake. She thanked Matteo by name. She stated that copies of the recording, medication logs, and security footage from the townhouse library had already been delivered to probate counsel that morning. She said the district attorney would receive them if any page disappeared tonight. Ava's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I only followed instructions, she said, faltering. Cynthia turned so sharply her pearls brushed her collar. There it was. The fracture made audible. Graham started toward the exit. Two plainclothes investigators, invited by Celia under the pretense of condolence attendance, stepped into the doorway and asked him to stay for a few questions. No handcuffs. Nothing theatrical. That made it worse. Celia faced Cynthia one last time. You wanted discretion, she said softly. This is what you taught your son to fear. By the time the storm fully arrived, the story had changed in every phone in the room. Celia was no longer the outsider who had married up. She was the widow who had opened the right envelope in front of the wrong audience. And in Dallas, that kind of correction lasts longer than flowers. Near midnight, Celia returned to the townhouse the first will had tried to push her from. The staff had gone. The funeral flowers had not yet arrived. At last, the house sounded honest. Wood settling. Ice melting in an untouched glass. Rain easing against the windows. She walked to the library bar and opened the leather atlas box where Matteo had hidden the April envelope. Empty now, except for one cuff link and a folded note she had not known existed. Owen's handwriting crossed the page in a weaker line than before. I did love you. I just loved being admired more, for too long. That was the sting. Not that he had never cared. Worse. He had cared, and still let them use her because it kept the family smooth and himself convenient. Celia sat in the dark and let that truth settle where rage had been. Winning did not restore innocence. It only cleared the room around the wound. Still, when her phone lit with a message from probate counsel confirming the court would freeze the Mercer transfers by morning, she allowed herself one long breath. Then another. Outside, somewhere beyond the gate, a news van idled. Inside, Celia placed Owen's note back in the Atlas box and closed the lid. She had exposed them. She had kept the house. She had not kept the marriage she thought she was defending. And that's the story. Sometimes justice arrives in a pressed black dress and waits for the room to underestimate it. Thank you for listening, and join me again next time for another tale of secrets, money, and the truth that refuses to stay buried.